What's going on, everybody? Anthony Cervino here on the RotoWire Fantasy Football YouTube channel with my way too early top 10 fantasy football running backs for 2025. Let's get into it. Number 10, Kyren Williams this season finished as the RB7 in PPR and the RB10 in fantasy points per game, despite the addition of Blake Corum. He was still the number one running back when it comes to snap share and number two when it comes to opportunity share. Corum got on the field a little bit more down the stretch, but it was clear that this is Kyren Williams' backfield. He was the entire backfield, number three amongst qualifying running backs in carries. He had 316 of them this season. He also had 40 pass catching targets, which was a little bit of a dip compared to last season. He was also the number one running back when it comes to red zone touches, including 12 goal line carries, which correlated to 16 total touchdowns. So this is now back-to-back years for Kyren Williams in which he scored the football at least 15 times. He also saw an uptick in rushing yards. He had 1,299 this season compared to 1,144 in 2023. There's a lot going on with the Rams. Their offensive line improved this season, but their overall offense and passing attack, especially down the stretch, took a step back. This offense became that much more Kyren Williams centric, and with the uncertainty of the future of Matthew Stafford as well as Cooper Kupp, looks like he is trending in the wrong direction. When we look ahead to 2025, Kyren Williams could be in line for yet another monster season when it comes to opportunity and overall fantasy production. Next up, Josh Jacobs. Josh Jacobs this year, after a little bit of a slow start, absolutely went off down the stretch. The RB6 in fantasy points per game and the RB8 in fantasy points in PPR leagues. Josh Jacobs, a little bit slow starting out when it comes to touchdowns, but in the second half, he absolutely popped. He scored a total of 16 touchdowns this season, and a lot of them came, like I said, after week 12. After week 12, he scored at least one touchdown in every single game going into week 18 against Chicago. Josh Jacobs also became the focal point of this offense. In fact, he went for over 100 total yards in every game but three since week 8. And when Josh Jacobs is getting all of that workload, it actually protects Jordan Love from throwing interceptions, which in the second half of the regular season, he didn't do that very much, if at all. It looks like Josh Jacobs is going to own this backfield. Yes, they gave a little bit of run to guys like Brooks and Wilson down the stretch. They will get Marshawn Lloyd back next season, but with his injury concerns, who knows how much run he'll get, what's going on with A.J. Dillon. But what we do know is that the Green Bay Packers wide receiver room, it's talented, but they don't have an alpha there. Jordan Love, as we've seen last season and early this season, when he has to throw volume, he makes mistakes. What we do know is that when Josh Jacobs is handling a monster workload, he's productive. Jordan Love doesn't make mistakes, and the Green Bay Packers are winning football games. I'm expecting another big year out of Josh Jacobs next season. Next, we're going to go to Christian McCaffrey. Now, CMC, we know what happened. Big-time bust, big-time disappointment for fantasy managers, but to be fair, Christian McCaffrey was hurt, only appeared in 4 games. And the 4 games he appeared in, if you ask me, he wasn't really ready to come back, nor was he healthy. He was still solid, still gave us 12 fantasy points per game in those appearances. but he did not score the football once. His rushing efficiency went down to 4 yards per carry. And he wasn't extremely active as a receiver out of the backfield. Christian McCaffrey, for the first time in a very long time, if ever, looked human. I get it. He's getting older. He's going to be entering his age 29 season, but he's still under contract with the 49ers. And what it's worth, the 49ers this season, they didn't look right, but they did suffer a boatload of injuries aside from CMC. We have to assume that if Christian McCaffrey gets healthy this season, the rest of that team gets healthy this season, that the 49ers and CMC should bounce back. I don't know if Christian McCaffrey at this point of his career, I don't know if he has those number one overall fantasy player years in him. I don't know if he's ever going to finish as the number one overall running back again, but am I willing to take a gamble on him the back of the second round as right around the 7th or 8th running back off the board because he still has a ceiling? Absolutely. Next up, we're going to get a little bit controversial, and I'm going to go to Chase Brown. Now, Chase Brown on the year was the RB10 and the RB14 of fantasy points per game. Mind you, first few games of the year, Zach Moss looked like the guy. It looked like, hey, maybe Chase Brown wasn't going to work out. And then Chase Brown started to get going. In fact, since week 10, Chase Brown is the RB5 in fantasy points per game, 19.8 per game in that category. He was the Cincinnati backfield, similar to Kyren Williams. Nobody else really got touches. And yes, Zach Moss got hurt. They traded for Khalil Herbert, but Khalil Herbert wasn't even a blip on a radar. Forget about Travion Williams. And not only did Chase Brown dominate the backfield, he was also fairly durable outside of a lower body injury down the stretch. This guy proved everybody wrong. People were worried about, is he just a pass catcher out of the backfield? Is he durable? Can he handle the workload? He checked off every single box. Now, this offense in Cincinnati, when you have Joe Burrow, we know Chase is coming back. We're going to assume Higgins is gone. There's a need for somebody like Chase Brown, who's an excellent receiver out of the backfield, 54 receptions for 360 yards this year, 11 total touchdowns. He was extremely active in the passing game. And without T. Higgins, who knows? Maybe he sees a further uptick in the passing game. We also know that Joe Mixon, when he was here, he was fairly active in the passing game. So that role is always going to be there for Chase Brown. And yes, I do expect Cincinnati Bengals to bring in another running back. I think it's going to be more of a complimentary back, more of a number 2 running back who, as long as Chase Brown stays healthy and productive, I do not see him eating into this Chase Brown workload. I'm willing to roll the dice. I think if Chase Brown can stay healthy for a full 16 games, and he's the guy for a full 16 or 17 games, we could be looking at, as long as this offense is healthy, health is very important with Burrow and Chase. If all those guys are healthy, the enemy defense is like, all right, we got to shut down the passing game. We're going to let Chase Brown beat us, and he can. We could be looking at a potential top 5 overall running back next season. Next up, another one I absolutely love, another newcomer, Bucky Irving. Now, Bucky Irving took him a little bit to get going. He flashed at times early this season, but it was still a lot of Rachaad White. But down the stretch, when it mattered most, Bucky Irving took over this backfield, and he absolutely dominated. Similar to Chase Brown, since week 10, Bucky Irving, the RB6 in fantasy points per game. And he can do it all. This isn't just a one-trick pony like Rachaad White as a receiver. Bucky can catch passes. Bucky can run in between the tackles. He's a complete every down running back, and he was used that way. This is a great offense with Liam Cohen, Baker Mayfield. We know all the dudes they have there. And when you're throwing the ball at a high rate with Baker, and you have Evans and McMillan, who knows what's going on with Godwin, there's going to be open running lanes. And they also scheme the running backs into the passing game as well. And despite the fact that Bucky wasn't always the guy in this backfield, he still ran for 1,121 yards, good for 10th amongst running backs. He also caught the 9th most receiving yards with 392. He can do it all. Now, who knows how this backfield shakes out? Will they give Rachaad White another chance? Will this be more of a 50-50 split early on? I do think we have to consider that. But if the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were paying attention to how Bucky Irving finished this season, how dominant he was, I'm going to draft him as if he is going to be the de facto number one running back. We're going to go to Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry, I get it. Doesn't catch a lot of passes. He doesn't need to. Derrick Henry, he's getting older. He's going to be entering his age 32 season. It doesn't matter. This year, Derrick Henry was an absolute monster. 1,921 yards, 5.9 yards per carry on 325 attempts, people. Career best, 18 touchdowns. This was his best season since 2020. He was in his mid-20s when he put up 2,000 yards and 17 scores. He's now 31, 1,918. When you have Lamar Jackson and there's a threat of the RPO, I think that balances out Derrick Henry's age. I think this team might have had some early offensive line deficiencies. That balances out when you have Lamar Jackson. And Lamar Jackson isn't going anywhere. And I believe Derrick Henry, at least for one more season, could be an absolute monster, not only for the Ravens, but also for fantasy football managers. And I do think there are going to be people out there who are going to rank him a little bit lower than I am. But what I saw this year was absolutely special, and he didn't tire down the stretch. In fact, Derrick Henry down the stretch was more effective than he was early. Derrick Henry down the stretch, since week 12, over 111 total yards in all but one game. Two of his best games coming in week 17 and 18, and obviously in the wild card round of the playoffs where he was an absolute monster as well. I'm all in on Derrick Henry next season. Remember, if you like content like this, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and the alert icon so you can be notified anytime we are live to answer your questions or drop videos just like this. If you have any questions, fantasy football, dynasty, trade, ask them in the comment section below. We'll get back to you as soon as we can. Next up, my running back 4, Jahmyr Gibbs. And some people think I'm a little bit too low on Gibbs. Right now, he ended the year as the RB1 overall and the RB2 in points. And yes, he did it with much of the year with David Montgomery being involved. Looking ahead to next year, there's a really, really good chance this Lions offense could be a little bit different. Ben Johnson's going to take a head coaching job. How does that affect Gibbs? We also know that Montgomery isn't going anywhere. And Gibbs down the stretch looked like the second coming. He put up at least 19 fantasy points in PPR in every single game since week 14, a few of them without Montgomery. If Montgomery continues to play his role, and the NFL isn't fantasy football, David Montgomery 100% has a role on this team. They like the role he has as the grinding back, as a short yardage back, the goal line back. And yes, it is going to ultimately eat into the ceiling of Gibbs. I am willing to draft Gibbs as a top 4 running back, but I don't think I can rank him any higher because, like I said, got to worry about Ben Johnson. What's this offense going to look like? And the fact that Montgomery, who was just signed to a contract extension, that role is not going anywhere. Next up, my guy, Devon Achane. Some people think, hey, Gibbs should be ahead of Achane. I don't think so. I am all in on Devon Achane. He's another one that proved, despite his size, he is absolutely positively durable. Did not miss a single game this year. This is a player who had exactly 100 more rushing attempts than he had in 2023. He also caught 78 receptions, 12 total touchdowns, over 1,400 total yards. What you have to really look at the game logs and the film to see is that this offense was no longer run through Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. This Miami offense ran through Devon Achane. He did it all, folks. In games with Tua, especially down the stretch from weeks 13 to 16, he had at least 7 targets in every game. That's actually happened a lot in games when Tua played. That 7 target mark, that 7 reception mark, that is absolutely priceless. That is pure gold in half point and full point PPR in fantasy football. We're going to expect Tyreek Hill to come back, even though he made some noise that he wanted out. But even so, Tyreek's going to be another year older. Jalen Waddle's still going to have those injury concerns. I'm expecting Devon Achane to possibly take on an even larger role for this Miami Dolphins offense. And is he a running back? Is he a receiver? I don't know, but he was the number 1 running back in receptions and receiving yards, 12 touchdowns, which gave him ranked 8th amongst the running back positions, 4th when it comes to routes run amongst running backs, number 2 in target share. The way they use him in the passing game as a receiver, there's a case to be made that Devon Achane finishes the overall RB1. My running back 2 is Bijan Robinson, and we are starting to see the emergence of Bijan, RB3 overall, RB3 in fantasy points per game. And it took a little while, right? Remember early in the season, Bijan got off to a slow start. He had fewer than 16 PPR points in every game through week 5. And then the training wheels came off, and Bijan Robinson absolutely positively went on a tear. He popped off for over 20 fantasy points in every game but 2 from weeks 6 to week 18. That is the Bijan Robinson we expect when we draft him. And he was even more involved when they made the quarterback change to Michael Penix. And Michael Penix probably going to be the guy from the get-go next year. And I think that helps Bijan Robinson, because if there's that threat of Penix, the runner, and as the thrower, that's going to open up the running lanes that much more for Bijan. And I think as we go on, we're going to see a little bit less of Tyler Algier as Bijan finally showed the world, hey, I'm the real deal, and you got to use me if you want to win. My number 1 running back, folks, Saquon Barkley, RB2 on the year, RB1 fantasy points per game. We know what Saquon did. Over 2,000 yards rushing, over 2,200 total yards from scrimmage, and 15 touchdowns, 5.8 yards per carry. Saquon did it all. He also stayed healthy. He was the focal point of the Philadelphia Eagles offense. They ran him into the ground. But he is also going to be entering his age 28 season. That doesn't worry me. The Eagles' offensive line is amongst the league's elite. That bodes well for Saquon and his usage. I don't think the Eagles want Jalen Hurts to have to throw the football a lot. And while Saquon is healthy, I believe they are going to continue to run this offense through Saquon Barkley, number 1 in receiving yards, 15 total touchdowns. He was an absolute terror on the field in fantasy and in the NFL. The yards per carry at 5.8 was outstanding. 6 yards per touch. Absolutely positively made it happen. When he got into space, Saquon showed why he's considered one of the best running backs on this planet. Saquon Barkley is the number 1 overall running back for 2025.